top international story in a political earthquake that has upended an already extraordinary 2024 race for the White House. U.S. President Joe Biden has dropped out of the U.S. presidential election and endorsed Vice President Kamala Harris as the Democratic Party's nominee. Biden said he was acting in the best interests of his party and the country by bowing out after weeks of pressure after a disastrous June debate against Donald Trump. So Joe Biden has exited as there were several questions which were raised about his mental faculties as well as his fitness to serve as the President of the United States. Now, this had stoked worries about his age as well as his mental fitness from top Democratic leaders. Now, among other things, this will make Kamala Harris, assuming the rest of the party accepts Biden's endorsement, the first non-white female and the first Indian origin American candidate for the U.S. presidency. Trump quickly reacted, saying Biden had not been fit to serve as president. He even hit out at Kamala Harris, saying that she's even more incompetent and easier to defeat than Joe Biden. Now, after the big booster from Joe Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris has spoken for the first time since he withdrew from the race. Harris has said, and I quote, "Joe Biden fights for the American people and we are deeply grateful for his service to the nation." As power plays continue in the Democratic camp, ladies and gentlemen, over who will be the challenger to Trump in the presidential election, who will face off against Donald Trump in the race for the White House. Listen in to what Kamala Harris had to say.
His honesty, his integrity, his commitment to his faith and his family, his big heart, and his love, deep love of our country. And I am firsthand witness that every day our President Joe Biden fights for the American people, and we are deeply, deeply grateful for his service to our nation.
And I'm joined by my colleague Akanksha Swaroop on the broadcast. So Akanksha, through the 4 years of Joe Biden, Kamala Harris was quite an invisible presence when it came to the key policy decisions as well as the key power plays from the US presidency against the Republicans. But now that Joe Biden has backed Kamala Harris to take on Donald Trump, is there some level of consensus in the Democratic Party that she should be the right candidate?
A very good evening to all our viewers. Ayushman, important to highlight that as we speak, we're also learning of reports that, the big talking point was about how Kamala Harris was not being endorsed by a Barack Obama or a Nancy Pelosi. But now reports are indicating that Nancy Pelosi, who's one of the senior most Democrats, somebody who was also considered to be very close to Joe Biden himself, has in fact also extended her support. She says that this is not just political, it is also personal, and she in fact extends all her support behind Kamala Harris. Many journalists are of the view that Barack Obama is deliberately maintaining a silence, and that doesn't mean that he's not supporting Kamala Harris, because he regards himself as a very elderly statesperson. So he would, in fact, deliberately choose not to really be vocal about his support behind Kamala. We'll have to see if that support comes in the days ahead. But having said that, important to also highlight that Kamala Harris has already won the support of 6 key governors. That also, in fact, includes Gretchen Whitmer of Michigan, Andy Beshear of Kentucky, Wes Moore of Maryland, Tim Walz of Minnesota, not to forget the fact that she's being backed by the likes of the Clintons. Hillary Clinton, remember, as a woman, had fought that election campaign for U.S. presidency back in 2016. So much that perhaps Kamala Harris can learn from Hillary herself, not to forget how Hillary and Joe Biden himself have in fact been pushing for donations for Kamala Harris. So there is ample support. Let's not forget that the woman's only left with only 3 months to campaign. So from garnering the much needed election funds, which till June, as far as Joe Biden were concerned, the election funding behind him was worth $96 million. Will she be able to access that kind of fund apparatus is something we'll have to see. Will the Democrats, in fact, go ahead with Kamala Harris endorsing her as the sole presidential candidate is something we'll also have to wait and watch. Or would they want a more democratic process is something that's also being endorsed by several political analysts. They're saying that at the upcoming Democratic National Convention, which begins on August 19th, we may expect some degree of political jockeying that will take place. So it's an unprecedented scenario, Ayushman, because remember, it was only in 1968 when the then U.S. president had decided not to fight for re-election.
Right. Thank you, Akanksha, for joining us on the broadcast for that piece of breaking news.